The first light of dawn touches the high walls of Thornbury Castle, and the darkness begins its slow retreat. The massive stone keep looms against the paling sky, its walls 3 yards thick, built to withstand siege engines and the passage of centuries. But this morning brings no siege, only the ordinary beginning of another day in the year 1250, when King Henry III sits on England's throne and most of Europe bows before the authority of Pope and monarch. You can hear the sound before you see it, the scraping of wood against stone, as the porter lifts the heavy bar from the castle's postern gate. His breath mists in the cold morning air. The year is halfway through, midsummer by the calendar, but these thick walls hold winter's chill deep within their bones. He's been awake since the monastery bells rang for lauds, the second prayer service of the night. Though here in the castle's outer ward, most continued sleeping. Only those with specific duties rose in that darkness before dawn. What was it truly like to live within these walls? Forget the tapestries of later centuries that show only feasting and pageantry. Forget the fairy tales. A medieval castle was not primarily a home. It was a fortress, an administrative center, a symbol of power, and a working community that housed anywhere from 50 to 500 souls. Within its walls lived a complete cross-section of medieval society, from the lord who commanded armies and dispensed justice, down through knights and ladies, priests and scribes, craftsmen and servants, to the serfs who mucked out stables and hauled water from the well. The social distance between these people was as vast as the physical distance between the great hall and the stables. Yet they lived pressed together within the same defensive walls, their lives intertwined by bonds of duty, custom, and mutual dependence. The lord needed the serf as much as the serf needed the lord, though neither would have phrased it quite that way. Let us spend this day within Thornbury's walls. We'll walk through the castle from its highest tower to its deepest cellar, from the lord's private chamber, where expensive glass fills the windows, to the servants' quarters, where straw pallets lie on bare earth. We'll witness the morning routine of Lady Eleanor, wife to the lord, who is currently away on the king's business. We'll follow William the steward as he conducts his endless rounds of administration. We'll watch Peter the blacksmith at his forge and smell the bread baking in Margaret the baker's ovens. We'll see young Robin, a serf's son, as he struggles under the weight of water buckets, dreaming of impossibilities. By the time the sun clears the eastern horizon, the castle has already begun its transformation from sleeping fortress to bustling community. This transformation happens every dawn, has happened every dawn for the century since these walls were raised. And it will continue long after everyone currently living here has returned to dust. But for now, in this specific morning in the middle of the 13th century, we are here. The smell of wood smoke and baking bread begins to drift across the bailey. Somewhere a rooster crows, late to his duty. A horse whinnies in the stables. The castle is waking, and we are about to discover what that truly means. To understand life within castle walls, we must first understand what a castle is and why it exists in this particular form at this particular moment in history. The great stone castles of England and France are relatively new to the landscape in 1250. Most were built within the last 2 centuries, following the Norman conquest of 1066. When William of Normandy invaded England, he brought with him not just an army, but an entirely new system of social organization, what historians would later call feudalism, though the people living within it never used that term. The Normans understood something fundamental about controlling conquered territory. You need visible, permanent symbols of power. Within 20 years of Hastings, the Normans had erected hundreds of castles across England. These early fortifications were often simple. A wooden tower atop an earthen mound, surrounded by a defensive ditch and palisade. Motte and Bailey castles, they're called. Quick to build, cheap to maintain, and effective at dominating the surrounding countryside. But wood burns, and as the Norman hold on England solidified, as wealth accumulated and architectural knowledge spread, the great lords began rebuilding in stone. The process took generations. The massive stone keeps, the curtain walls with their flanking towers, the elaborate gatehouses. These required immense resources. Stone had to be quarried, often miles away, and transported by cart or barge. Master masons had to be found and paid. Labor had to be organized. The castle we're visiting today, Thornbury, stands in the west of England, not far from the Welsh Marches, the border territory that remained contested for centuries after the conquest. Its lord, Geoffrey de Thornbury, holds his lands directly from the king. In exchange for this honor, he owes the king military service, 40 days of knight service per year, which he fulfills either personally or by sending knights from his own household. He also owes financial obligations, various fees and taxes that help fund the king's government and wars. But Geoffrey de Thornbury is far more than just a warrior who happens to own land. He is a judge, an administrator, an economic manager, and the center of a complex web of obligations and relationships. Every person living in Thornbury Castle, and in the villages and farms for miles around, is connected to Geoffrey through bonds of service, rent, or obligation. This is the feudal pyramid. At the top sits the king, who theoretically owns all land in the kingdom. He grants portions of this land to his great lords, earls, barons, and bishops. These magnates, in turn, grant smaller portions to their own followers, the knights and lesser nobility. At the bottom of this pyramid are the peasants, some free, most not, who actually work the land. Everyone in this system owes something to someone above them. And everyone, except those at the very bottom, has people below them who owe them service or rent. The castle is where this system becomes physical and visible. Within its walls, the lord maintains his household, the permanent community of people who serve him directly. Knights and men-at-arms provide military service. A steward manages the lord's lands and finances. A marshal oversees the horses and military equipment. A chaplain tends to spiritual needs. Servants of every description keep the complex machinery of castle life functioning. But the castle is not isolated from the surrounding countryside. It sits at the center of a manor, or more typically, several manors, since successful lords control multiple estates. The manor is both a geographic unit and an economic one. It typically includes a village surrounding agricultural fields, pastures, woods, perhaps a mill and a church. The peasants living in these villages owe labor service to their lord. Several days each week, they must work in the lord's own fields, tend his animals, repair his buildings. The rest of the time, they work their own small holdings. This system has been refined over centuries. By 1250, it is mature, established, familiar. Everyone knows their place. Everyone understands the obligations and expectations. That doesn't mean everyone is happy with the arrangement, far from it. But it is the world as it is, as it has always been, as most people assume it always will be. The physical structure of a castle reflects its purposes. Defense comes first. Every feature of the architecture is designed to give advantage to defenders and disadvantage to attackers. The outer walls, called curtain walls, are typically 20 to 30 feet high and 8 to 12 feet thick. Small is the relative term here. These are massive constructions. They're topped with battlements, the distinctive notched parapets that allow defenders to shoot arrows while remaining mostly protected. At intervals along these curtain walls stand towers, usually round or D-shaped. These project outward from the wall line, allowing defenders to shoot along the face of the walls, catching attackers in crossfire. The towers also provide additional vertical height for observation and for mounting larger weapons like ballistas or trebuchets. The weakest point of any castle is its gate, and so the gatehouse receives special attention. The entrance passage is flanked by towers. Heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron bars provide the first barrier. Behind them hangs a portcullis, an iron-reinforced wooden grating that can be dropped quickly to seal the entrance. Some elaborate gatehouses include murder holes in the ceiling of the entrance passage, through which defenders can drop stones or pour unpleasant substances on anyone trying to force entry. Inside the outer walls lies the bailey or ward, an open courtyard that serves as the castle's working space. Here you'll find stables, workshops, storerooms, barracks, and various other buildings. In many castles, the bailey is divided into an outer and inner ward, with the inner ward containing the most important structures and providing a final defensive position if attackers breach the outer defenses. At the heart of the castle stands the keep, also called the Great Tower or donjon. This is the strongest, most defensible structure, the place of last resort if all other defenses fail. But in peacetime, which is most of the time, the keep serves as the lord's residence and the administrative center of his lands. The Great Hall, where the household gathers for meals and where the lord conducts his judicial and administrative business, is typically located on the second floor of the keep, reached by an external stone staircase that can be easily defended. Everything about the castle's design emphasizes hierarchy and control. The higher you go, both socially and physically, the more privileged your position. The lord and his family occupy the upper floors of the keep, where rooms are larger, windows more numerous, and privacy more attainable. Knights and important household officers have small chambers in the keep or in towers. Common servants sleep in communal spaces, above stables, in corners of workshops, wherever room can be found. Privacy, as we understand it, barely exists for most castle inhabitants. Only the highest nobility have private chambers. Everyone else lives, works, eats, and sleeps in view of others. The Great Hall itself serves multiple purposes. It is dining room, courtroom, occasional bedroom, and the social heart of the castle. At night, many of the household servants simply unroll pallets on the hall floor and sleep there, near the dying embers of the central hearth. The smells within a castle are distinctive and, to modern noses, would be overwhelming. Imagine the odor of wood smoke, always present, mixed with the earthy smell of rushes on the floors. Herbs like lavender or chamomile are strewn among them to help mask less pleasant aromas. Add to this the smell of horses and other animals, of unwashed bodies and clothing, of chamber pots, of cooking food, of tallow candles and burning peat. In warm weather, when windows are opened, fresh air provides some relief. In winter, when every opening is shuttered against the cold, the air becomes thick and close. Sanitation is primitive by modern standards, but not non-existent. Larger castles have garderobes, small chambers built into the thickness of walls or projecting out from towers, with seats positioned over shaft that carry waste down to the moat or a cesspit. These are the medieval equivalent of toilets, though calling them rooms with a view would be generous. Smaller castles make do with chamber pots that must be emptied regularly, a task that falls to the lowest servants. Water is a constant challenge. Unless a castle is fortunate enough to have a well within its defensive walls, water must be hauled from outside, stored in cisterns, and carefully rationed. Siege, real or potential, is always a consideration. A castle without its own water source is vulnerable. This is why the well in the bailey, if one exists, is such a crucial feature. And it's why carrying water is such a significant part of the daily routine for many servants. Fire is both necessity and danger. Every castle needs multiple fires burning at all times, in the kitchen for cooking, in the great hall for heat and light, in the lord's chambers, perhaps in the workshops. But fire in a structure filled with wood, straw, and tapestries is terrifying. Everyone has heard stories of castles that burned. The stone walls might survive, but everything inside can be consumed. This is why the kitchens are often separate buildings, connected to the great hall by a covered passage. Better to lose the kitchen than the entire keep. Light comes from small, expensive luxuries. Windows are few and small in defensive walls, designed more for shooting arrows than admitting light. Glass is rare and expensive. Only the wealthiest can afford it. Most windows are simply openings fitted with wooden shutters. In winter, oiled parchment or linen sometimes covers these openings, admitting a little light while blocking some of the wind. Inside, the darkness is pushed back by candles, expensive beeswax for the Lord's family and chapel, cheaper tallow for everyone else, and by torches, oil lamps, and the ever-burning hearth fires. This is the world that waits outside Lady Eleanor's chamber as she rises from her bed this June morning in 1250. This is the world that William the Steward must manage, that Peter the blacksmith must serve, that young Robin must navigate. A world of stone and smoke, duty and hierarchy, where your birth determines your destiny and the castle walls define the boundaries of your universe. Now, let us enter that world and see how each person within it faces the coming day. Lady Eleanor wakes, as she does every morning, to the sound of her maid drawing back the bed curtains. These heavy wool hangings have kept the night's chill at bay, or rather, they've created a small, warm pocket of air around the bed. The chamber beyond is cold despite the season. Stone walls, even in summer, hold winter's memory. "Good morrow, my lady," says Agnes, Eleanor's personal maid. She has been awake for an hour already, stoking the small charcoal brazier that provides additional heat to the chamber, laying out Eleanor's clothing, checking that the chamber pot has been emptied by the lowest servant. Eleanor is 32 years old, which by the standards of her time makes her neither young nor old. She has been married to Geoffrey de Thornbury for 16 years and has borne him 7 children, 4 of whom survive. Her eldest son, Roger, at 14, is away at another lord's castle serving as a squire, learning the arts of war and chivalry. Her 2 daughters, Matilda and Joan, aged 12 and 10, are here in the castle, receiving their own education in the arts considered necessary for noble women. Her youngest child, Thomas, is only 6 and still very much in the women's sphere. In Geoffrey's absence, he has been gone these 3 months, attending to the king's business. Eleanor is not merely keeping house. She is the acting lord of Thornbury. All decisions, all justice, all administration flow through her. This is not unusual. With lords frequently away on campaign, attending court, or managing distant properties, their wives must be capable administrators. A great lady is not simply decorative. She is a manager, a judge, a military commander if necessary, and the keeper of her husband's honor and interests. Agnes helps Eleanor dress, a process that takes time and care. First comes the chemise, a long linen undergarment that falls to the ankles. Over this goes the cotta, a long dress made of fine wool, dyed a deep blue, expensive, a sign of status. The sleeves are long and tight, requiring small buttons at the wrists. Over the cotte goes the surcoat, a sleeveless overgarment of even finer material. Silk brought at great expense from the Mediterranean, embroidered with the Thornbury family symbols. Eleanor's hair must be covered. This is not merely custom, but religious requirement for married women. Agnes has already braided Eleanor's greying brown hair. Now she carefully arranges the wimple, a piece of white linen that covers Eleanor's neck and chin, and over this places a veil held by a golden circlet. Eleanor dislikes the wimple. It's confining and uncomfortable, but she would no more appear in public without it than she would appear naked. While Agnes works, Eleanor prays silently. She has already completed her private devotions earlier, immediately upon waking, but prayer is woven throughout the day. The words come automatically after years of practice. Pater noster, qui es in caelis. Our Father, who art in heaven. The morning sun is stronger now, slanting through the narrow windows of the chamber. These windows actually have glass, small panes set in lead, expensive beyond measure. Glass transforms a room, admitting light while keeping out wind and rain. Most people in the castle have never touched glass. Many have never even seen it. Once dressed, Eleanor takes a moment to look at herself in her mirror. A polished disc of bronze, not glass, which makes mirrors rare and precious. She sees a woman whose face shows the marks of her life. The fine lines around her eyes, the slight sag beneath her chin. The complexion of someone who has borne children, suffered fevers, survived the daily dangers of medieval life. She was considered beautiful as a young bride. Now she is considered dignified, capable, worthy of respect. Before leaving her chamber, Eleanor eats a small breakfast that Agnes has brought: a piece of wheat bread, some cheese, watered wine. The household has not yet gathered for the main meal of the day, which won't occur until mid-morning, but Eleanor needs something in her stomach before beginning her duties. The bread is good, made from wheat flour rather than rye or barley, another marker of status. The poor eat dark, coarse bread when they eat bread at all. The chamber Eleanor shares with her absent husband occupies the entire top floor of the keep's western tower. It is, by the standards of the day, luxurious. The floor is covered with wooden planks rather than bare stone, and these are strewn with fresh rushes mixed with herbs. Tapestries hang on the walls, providing insulation against the cold and dampness of the stone. These tapestries are valuable. Each one represents months of skilled labor. They depict scenes from the Bible and from classical mythology. For Eleanor, like many noble women, is better educated than most men below her station. She can read Latin and French, though not English, which is considered a peasant tongue. A small shelf holds books, 3 of them, each worth more than a horse. One is a psalter, a book of psalms used for private prayer. Another is a book of hours, similar but more elaborate. The third is a romance, tales of King Arthur and his knights, written in French. Eleanor reads from these books most nights before sleep, sometimes aloud to her daughters, teaching them both reading and proper French pronunciation. Eleanor descends from her chamber via the spiral staircase that winds through the tower. The stairs turn clockwise as they descend, designed so that a defender fighting his way up would have his sword arm against the central column, while an attacker coming up would have his sword arm blocked by the wall. Every detail of castle architecture considers defense. She emerges into the great hall on the keep's second floor. Here the household will soon gather for the day's first meal, but for now the hall is still being prepared. Servants are setting up the trestle tables that were dismantled and stored against the walls overnight. Others are sweeping out the old rushes on the floor, which have become fouled with spilled food and other debris, replacing them with fresh ones. The central hearth, a massive stone platform in the center of the room, still holds embers from last night's fire. A servant feeds it fresh wood, coaxing flames back to life. The great hall is impressive by any standard. It measures 40 feet long by 20 feet wide, with a high timber ceiling supported by massive oak beams. The walls are decorated with tapestries and weapons, swords, shields, a few pieces of armor, arranged for display. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform called the dais, sits the high table where Eleanor, her children, and important guests will eat. Everyone else will sit at the trestle tables arranged perpendicular to the high table. Eleanor moves through the hall, greeting servants by name, checking on preparations. She notices that one of the tapestries has come loose from its fastening and instructs a servant to repair it. She samples the fresh rushes to ensure they've been properly mixed with herbs. Today she smells meadow sweet and lavender, acceptable choices for summer. In winter they use thyme and sage, which have stronger scents to mask less pleasant odors. William the steward approaches, bowing slightly. He is perhaps 50 years old, grey-haired, dressed in good wool but nothing ostentatious. William has served the Thornbury family for 30 years, first Geoffrey's father, now Geoffrey himself. He knows every detail of the estate's operations, every piece of income and expenditure, every obligation owed to the Lord, and every obligation the Lord owes to others. "Good morrow, my lady," William says. "The accounts from the week require your attention. Also, there is a dispute between two villains over field boundaries that must be settled. And word has come from the village that Peter the smith's daughter wishes permission to marry outside the manor." Eleanor nods. This is the daily routine of lordship, an endless succession of decisions and judgments large and small. "We shall attend to the accounts after breaking our fast," she says. "Send word to the villains that I will hear their dispute at the noon hour, and have Peter's daughter brought to me this afternoon. I would speak with her before deciding." The marriage of a serf is not a simple matter. Legally, serfs are not free to move about or make decisions without their lord's permission. If Peter's daughter marries a man from another manor, she becomes the property, in effect, of that manor's lord. Thornbury loses her labor and that of any children she might bear. For this loss, Geoffrey would expect compensation, a fee called merchet. But the decision involves more than just money. It affects Peter's status and happiness, the welfare of the girl herself, and the delicate web of relationships between neighboring lords. Before Eleanor can discuss these matters further, a bell begins to ring from the castle chapel. It's time for prime, the first church service of the day. Eleanor must attend. Religion is not separate from daily life, but woven through every aspect of it. The castle has its own chaplain, Father Benedict, who conducts services throughout the day according to the canonical hours. Matins and lauds before dawn, prime at sunrise, terce at mid-morning, sext at noon, none at mid-afternoon, vespers at sunset, and compline before bed. Eleanor walks across the bailey to the chapel, Agnes following a respectful 3 paces behind. The chapel is small, able to hold perhaps 40 people at most, but beautifully appointed. The walls inside are painted with scenes from the lives of saints, the colors still bright. Light filters through narrow windows and one small section of stained glass, a recent addition Geoffrey commissioned before his departure, a depiction of St. George slaying the dragon. Father Benedict stands at the altar, which is covered with a cloth embroidered by Eleanor's own hands. The chaplain is a younger man, perhaps 30, the son of a merchant who showed aptitude for learning and was sent to study at a monastery. He's been at Thornbury for 5 years now, long enough to understand the rhythms of the household, trusted enough to serve as Geoffrey's occasional scribe for important letters. The service is in Latin, which Eleanor follows perfectly, but which most of the servants understand only through long familiarity. The words wash over them like music, beautiful and mysterious. Father Benedict chants the Psalms in a clear voice. The small congregation responds at the appropriate moments. The chapel smells of beeswax candles and incense, a sharp contrast to the earthier smells of the bailey outside. Eleanor prays with genuine devotion, but part of her mind remains occupied with the day's concerns. She prays for Geoffrey's safe return, for her children's health, for the success of the harvest now ripening in the fields, for the king's justice, for her own soul and the souls of her ancestors. She prays, too, for those under her care, the servants and serfs whose welfare depends on her decisions. This is not merely duty, but genuine concern. Eleanor believes, as everyone in her world believes, that she will answer to God for how she uses her power. The Lord, or in this case the Lady, has obligations that match their privileges. After prime, the household gathers in the great hall for the morning meal. The trestle tables are now set up, and bread has been laid out at each place along with wooden cups for ale. Eleanor takes her seat at the center of the high table, her daughters on either side, young Thomas on her left. The chaplain sits at the end of the high table, as do William the steward and John the marshal, who oversees the castle's military aspects and the stables. The meal begins with Father Benedict saying grace in Latin. Then servants begin bringing food from the kitchen. The morning meal is substantial, the day's main meal, the one that must fuel hours of labor. For Eleanor and her family, there is white bread, butter, cheese, cold meat from yesterday's supper, and ale. Further down the hall, at the lower tables, the food is slightly less refined, darker bread, less meat, but still substantial. Geoffrey runs what's considered a generous household. Even the lowliest servants eat better here than they would in their own villages. A castle household consumes astonishing quantities of food. Thornbury, which houses about 80 people permanently, plus visitors and travelers, requires several tons of grain per month, hundreds of gallons of ale, and a steady supply of meat, fish, vegetables and dairy products. Much of this comes from the Lord's own manors. grain from his fields, meat from his flocks and herds, vegetables from the castle's own gardens. But some must be purchased. Salt for preserving meat, spices for flavoring food, dried fruits and other luxuries for the Lord's table. The great hall buzzes with conversation during the meal, though careful hierarchy governs even this. Those at the high table speak in French, the language of the nobility. Further down the hall, people speak in English, the language of common folk. The two languages exist side by side in England, 2.5 centuries after the Norman conquest, with French still dominant among the elite, but English the language of the majority. Eleanor uses the mealtime to handle some business, speaking quietly with William about estate matters. She learns that the wheat harvest looks promising, but that there's concern about disease among the sheep in one of the outlying pastures. A new family has arrived in the village seeking permission to settle. They're refugees from a manor where the Lord treated his people harshly. Eleanor will need to investigate their story before deciding whether to accept them. Such decisions are delicate. If she accepts everyone who claims ill treatment elsewhere, neighboring lords will see Thornbury as encouraging rebellion among serfs. But turning away genuinely ill-treated people offends Christian charity. Young Thomas, her 6-year-old son, is restless during the meal, playing with his food rather than eating. Eleanor gently but firmly corrects his behavior. Thomas will not grow up to be a warrior like his elder brother. His health is too delicate, his temperament too scholarly. Eleanor has already decided, though she hasn't yet told Geoffrey, that Thomas will enter the church. Perhaps he'll become a monk, perhaps a priest. Either way, he'll need education, discipline, and the ability to sit still, all of which must be taught now. Matilda and Joan, Eleanor's daughters, eat with perfect manners, speaking only when spoken to, keeping their eyes downcast. They have been well trained in the behavior expected of noble maidens. In a few years, Eleanor will begin seeking appropriate marriages for them. This process will involve negotiations with other noble families, careful consideration of lands and alliances, and, Eleanor hopes, some attention to whether the proposed husbands seem like decent men. Eleanor's own marriage was arranged when she was 11 years old, finalized when she was 16. Geoffrey was 23 then, already a proven warrior. The marriage has been, by the standards of such arrangements, successful. Geoffrey is not unkind. He respects Eleanor's judgment. He doesn't keep mistresses, at least none that Eleanor knows about. They have produced healthy children. One cannot ask for much more. After the meal, the hall empties quickly. Everyone has work. The servants clear the tables and dismantle them again. The knights and men-at-arms head out to practice their military skills. Even in peacetime, warriors must train constantly. The craftsmen return to their workshops. The chaplain retires to his small chamber to work on the castle's records. He serves as Geoffrey's scribe for important documents. Eleanor, accompanied by William, retires to the small chamber that serves as an office. Here, the administrative work of the manor happens. Rolls of parchment and wax tablets cover the table. William has been recording the week's activities. Income from rents, expenditures for purchases. work done on various building projects, livestock bought and sold, justice administered, obligations fulfilled. Eleanor listens as William explains the accounts. The numbers are recorded in Roman numerals, which make calculation difficult. Most people use an abacus for any complex arithmetic or simply count on their fingers. Arabic numerals exist. They're used by merchants in Italy and scholars in universities, but they haven't yet spread to English castle administration. The accounts reveal the complexity of managing a great estate. There are rents to collect from various tenants. Some pay in money, silver pennies, the standard coin of the realm. Others pay in kind, bushels of grain, sides of pork, days of labor. There are fees from the mill. The lord monopolizes milling in his domain, and peasants must pay to have their grain ground. There are court fines from people who broke minor laws or failed to fulfill obligations. There are sales of surplus grain and wool. Against this income are expenses. Wages for specialized workers, like the castle's blacksmith, carpenter, and baker. Purchases of items that can't be produced locally. Fees and taxes owed to the king. Maintenance on buildings and equipment. Hospitality for guests and travelers. Alms for the poor. Eleanor asks pointed questions. Why has the income from the mill decreased? William explains that the millstone needs replacement, an expensive undertaking. Has the new shepherd proven reliable? Mostly, though there was one incident with a lost sheep. What about the dispute with the neighboring lord over forest boundaries? Still unresolved, requiring further negotiation. This work continues through the morning. Around midday, Eleanor hears the dispute between the two villains over field boundaries. The men stand before her in the great hall, nervous and uncomfortable in the presence of their lady. They explain their positions, each claiming the other has encroached on his assigned strips in the common field. Eleanor listens patiently, asking questions to clarify the facts. She consults with William, who has records of past field assignments. Eventually she renders judgment, splitting the disputed land between them with an adjustment in next year's assignments to balance any unfairness. The men accept her decision. They have no choice, really, but the decision seems fair enough that neither feels too aggrieved. This is the goal of manorial justice, not perfect fairness, which is impossible, but rough fairness that maintains social peace. In the afternoon, Peter, the blacksmith's daughter, a girl of 16 named Emma, is brought before Eleanor. Emma is terrified. She's never spoken to the lady before, never been this close to such power. She curtsies awkwardly and keeps her eyes on the floor. Eleanor speaks gently. Emma, I understand you wish to marry. Yes, my lady. Emma's voice is barely audible. And the man is from another manor? Yes, my lady. He is a freeman, a carpenter. He works on various manors but lives at Sutton. A freeman. That changes things slightly. Emma herself is not free, being born a serf, but if she marries a freeman and leaves the manor, her children would have uncertain status. It's the kind of situation that leads to disputes between lords. Eleanor asks more questions. How did Emma meet this man? Does her father approve? What kind of man is he? Emma answers haltingly but honestly. The carpenter came to Thornbury to work on the village church. He and Emma met and, well, these things happen. Peter, Emma's father, approves. The man seems decent and hard-working, but Emma is Peter's only daughter, his youngest child. Losing her will grieve him. Eleanor considers. This is not simply a legal matter, but a human one. Emma is young, but 16 is old enough for marriage. The man seems acceptable. Peter will be sad, but he has sons who can help him in his smithy, and refusing permission might drive Emma to run away, which would shame everyone and create larger problems. You may marry, Eleanor decides. The merche will be 2 shillings to be paid by your husband-to-be within the month. And Emma, come see me before you leave. I'll give you something for your wedding. Emma's face transforms with joy and relief. Thank you, my lady. Thank you. She backs away, still curtsying, nearly tripping over her own feet in her happiness. After Emma leaves, Eleanor feels tired. It's only mid-afternoon, but the day has been full of decisions, each one affecting real lives. She returns to her chamber for a rare moment of rest. Agnes brings her wine, good wine, not the sour ale that most people drink, and Eleanor sits by the window looking out over the bailey. From here she can see the whole busy world of the castle. In the bailey below, life proceeds with its usual organized chaos. The blacksmith's forge glows red, hammer ringing on anvil. Servants carry water from the well. Chickens scratch in the dirt near the kitchen. Children play some running game, darting between adults, occasionally getting shouted at to move along. Horses neigh in the stables. Somewhere a woman is singing, a work song in English that Eleanor doesn't understand all the words to but recognizes as something about spinning wool. This is her world, Eleanor thinks. These stone walls, these people, these daily routines and endless responsibilities. She is powerful within this world. She gives orders and they're obeyed. She renders judgment and it's accepted. She controls resources that most people can't imagine. But she's also constrained by it. She cannot leave without her husband's permission. She cannot make major decisions about her own lands and property. She cannot choose her own life's path. She was born to this role and has fulfilled it well, but some days she wonders what it would be like to have choices, to be free. But these are not thoughts to dwell on. Such questions lead nowhere and accomplish nothing. Eleanor finishes her wine and returns to her duties. There is always more work to be done. While Lady Eleanor manages the administrative heart of the castle, the physical work that keeps everything functioning falls to dozens of servants and laborers. Let us follow one of them through his day and see the castle from a very different perspective. Robin is 14 years old, though he doesn't know this precisely. Peasants don't celebrate birthdays or track years the way nobility does. He knows he was born in the winter, during one of the great storms that everyone still talks about, and he knows he's lived through 14 harvests. That's enough. He woke before dawn in the space above the stables where several of the younger male servants sleep. The space is cramped, smells of horses and hay, and in winter is freezing. But in summer, it's tolerable. Robin shares a straw pallet with 2 other boys. They have one thin blanket between them. This is normal. Privacy and personal space are luxuries that Robin cannot even imagine wanting because he's never experienced them. His first task each morning is to carry water. The castle's well is deep and the bucket is heavy even before it's filled. Robin makes this trip 20, 30, sometimes 40 times each morning. Water for the kitchen, water for the stables, water for the laundry, water for washing, water for the guardrobes. The buckets are heavy, and his shoulders ache constantly, but this is simply how things are. The ache is as much a part of him as his brown hair or his crooked front tooth. Robin is a serf, which means he is not free. He belongs to the manor of Thornbury, in much the way that the horses in the stable belong to it. He cannot leave without permission. He cannot marry without permission. If the Lord decided to transfer him to another of his manors, Robin would have to go. His father and grandfather were serfs before him, and his children, if he ever has any, will be serfs after. But this bondage is not the same as slavery, a distinction that matters greatly to people like Robin, even if it might seem like splitting hairs to an outside observer. A serf cannot be sold separately from his land. He has customary rights that the Lord cannot easily violate. He is a Christian soul, equal in God's eyes to any lord. He owns personal property, tools, perhaps a few chickens, maybe a pig. He has standing in the manorial court to bring complaints and disputes. He's at the bottom of the social hierarchy, yes. But he is part of that hierarchy, not outside it. Still, Robin's life is hard by any measure. He works from before sunrise until after sunset, 6 days a week. Sundays he attends Mass in the village church, and then does necessary maintenance work. No field labor on the Sabbath. But animals still need care. Fires still need tending. Life doesn't stop. His diet is monotonous. Dark bread made of mixed grains, pottage, a thick soup of vegetables, occasionally with a little meat, cheese, ale. He rarely eats meat except on feast days. He's never tasted the white bread that the Lord's family eats, never drunk wine except once at Easter, when the priest gave him a tiny sip during Mass. He's worn the same wool tunic and hose for 2 years. In winter, he'll add a wool cloak, but he doesn't have separate seasonal clothing. These are his clothes. Yet Robin doesn't spend much time thinking about what he lacks because he's never known anything different. This is simply life. Some people are born lords, some are born serfs. This is the order established by God, explained by every priest Robin has ever heard speak. The Lord's job is to fight and protect. The priest's job is to pray. The peasant's job is to work. All three are necessary. All three are part of God's plan. Robin has heard this hundreds of times. He believes it, or at least he's never seriously questioned it. What Robin does think about, as he hauls his endless buckets of water, is food. He's always hungry. The portions he receives are adequate to keep him functioning, but never quite enough to satisfy. He dreams sometimes of eating until he's truly full, of having as much bread as he wants, of meat every day. These are fantasies as remote as dreaming of becoming a knight. He also thinks about Catherine, the baker's daughter, who is 15 and pretty, and sometimes smiles at him when he brings water to the kitchen. Robin has no idea how to court her, or even if such a thing is possible for someone in his position. Marriage requires permission. requires means to support a family, requires a place to live. Robin has none of these things and no immediate prospect of acquiring them. But still, Catherine's smile makes the ache in his shoulders easier to bear. By mid-morning, Robin has made countless trips between the well and various destinations around the castle. His shoulders burn, his hands, already heavily calloused, have developed new blisters from the bucket handles. But the water carrying is only the first part of his day. His next task is to help muck out the stables. Thornbury Castle houses 20 horses, massive destriers ridden by knights in battle, smaller palfreys for travelling, sturdy draft horses for pulling carts. These animals produce prodigious quantities of manure, which must be removed daily and carted out to be spread on the Lord's fields or piled to compost. Robin works alongside the stable grooms, men with higher status than his own because they have valuable skills. They know how to care for expensive war horses, how to recognize diseases, how to trim hooves and prepare feed. Robin just shovels shit, and for the rest of the day he'll carry that smell with him, no matter how much he tries to clean his clothes. The work is back-breaking, the smell overwhelming, but Robin does it without complaint because complaining accomplishes nothing and might get him beaten. The marshal who oversees the stables has a ready hand with a stick for servants who seem lazy or impertinent. Robin has felt that stick before and has no desire to feel it again. By the time the noon hour arrives, Robin is exhausted, filthy, and desperately thirsty. He breaks for the midday meal, which for servants consists of bread and ale consumed quickly while standing or sitting on the ground wherever convenient. The castle feeds its servants. This is part of the arrangement. But the food is basic and the portions calculated to maintain working capacity, nothing more. After the meal, Robin's afternoon tasks vary depending on what needs doing. Today he's assigned to help the carpenter repair one of the wooden buildings in the outer bailey. This is actually desirable work. The carpenter is a skilled craftsman and generally a decent man, and Robin might learn something useful. Skills are the only way for someone in Robin's position to improve his lot. If he could become a trained craftsman instead of just a general laborer, his life would improve significantly. The carpenter, a man named Thomas, shows Robin how to properly plane a board, how to read the grain of the wood, how to fit joints. Thomas talks while he works, explaining his craft. Robin listens intently, trying to remember everything. But he also knows that becoming an actual carpenter would require years of training, probably formal apprenticeship, which would require fees his family doesn't have. Still, any skill, any knowledge might prove useful someday. The afternoon wears on. The sun, which rose so early in this June season, begins its slow descent. Robin's hands are covered in splinters now, adding to the blisters from the morning's water carrying. His back aches from bending over the work, but he's learning, and learning feels good in a way that mere labor doesn't. As evening approaches, there's more water to carry. The kitchen needs it for preparing supper. The stables need it for the horses' evening drink. Robin makes his rounds again, his body moving almost automatically now, muscles remembering the motions even as his mind wanders. He thinks about his family. His father works in the fields of the Lord's domain, the land that the Lord keeps for his own use rather than parceling out to tenants. It's hard work, dawn to dusk during planting and harvest seasons, but his father is skilled at it and is treated with a certain respect. His mother spins wool and weaves cloth, both for the family's own use and as part of the labor dues owed to the Lord. His two younger sisters help with this work, their small fingers surprisingly quick at the spindle. Robin hasn't seen his family in 3 weeks. He works and lives at the castle, visiting the village only occasionally. This separation is normal. Most castle servants come from the surrounding villages and manors, drawn to castle service because it offers slightly better food and perhaps the chance to learn skills or rise in status. But the separation still sometimes makes Robin lonely, especially at night when he lies on his straw pallet between 2 snoring boys and thinks about his mother's face or his father's rare laughter. By the time supper is served in the great hall, Robin is almost too tired to eat. But he forces down his bread and pottage because tomorrow will bring more of the same, and he'll need the strength. After supper comes the last round of tasks: banking the fires that must stay lit overnight, checking that all animals have water, shuttering windows that were opened during the day. Finally, when full darkness has fallen and the castle has settled into its nighttime quiet, Robin climbs the ladder to his sleeping space above the stables. He removes his shoes, simple leather pieces wrapped around his feet and tied with cord, and lies down on the pallet. The other boys are already there, one already snoring. Robin pulls the thin blanket over himself as much as possible and closes his eyes. His last thought before sleep claims him is of Catherine's smile. And then he's unconscious, his body demanding the rest it needs to face another identical tomorrow. This is Robin's life. It will not change significantly unless something extraordinary happens. He will probably work as a castle servant for another decade or so, until his body starts to break down from the constant labor. Then, if he's lucky, he might be assigned less physically demanding work, perhaps helping in the gardens or doing light maintenance tasks. If he's unlucky, he'll simply become less capable until he can't work at all, at which point he'll return to his village and hope his family can support him or depend on the charity of the church. He will probably never travel more than 20 miles from where he was born. He will never read or write. He will never make a decision more significant than which path to take between the well and the kitchen. He will never taste luxury or experience freedom in any meaningful sense. And yet, within these constraints, Robin is fully human. He hopes, he dreams, even if his dreams are small by our standards. He loves, even if he barely knows what to do with that feeling. He has dignity, even if others rarely acknowledge it. His life matters to him and to those who know him, even if history will never record his name. Between the exalted world of Lady Eleanor and the hard world of Robin, the water carrier, lies a middle realm of specialists, craftsmen, and skilled servants. These people have status above common laborers, but below the noble family. They possess valuable skills that give them some leverage, some small measure of control over their lives. Peter the blacksmith is such a man. He's 43 years old, though he looks older. The work ages a man. His face is seamed with wrinkles. His hands are scarred from countless small burns and cuts. His hearing is poor from decades of hammer strike ringing in his ears. But his arms are still powerful. His skill is undimmed, and he is essential to the functioning of the castle in a way that Robin can never be. Peter was born a serf like Robin, but his father was also a blacksmith and taught him the trade. Metalworking requires years of training, considerable strength, and a particular kind of intelligence. The ability to judge temperatures by color, to know how much to heat and cool and work the metal, to solve the physical problems that each project presents. Not everyone can do this work. Those who can are valuable. Peter's forge sits in a wooden building in the outer bailey, positioned there because of fire danger. The building is open on one side to let smoke escape. The forge itself is a massive stone hearth with bellows worked by an apprentice boy who pumps the leather handles up and down, forcing air into the fire, making the charcoal glow white-hot. On this June day, Peter is making horseshoes, endless horseshoes. The castle's horses require new shoes every few weeks, and there are always more horses coming and going. Peter heats iron rods in the forge until they glow red, then hammers them on his anvil, shaping them precisely to fit individual horses' hooves. Each shoe requires dozens of hammer strikes, each strike placed exactly right. After shaping, each shoe must have 8 holes punched for the nails, the holes placed just so. Then the shoe is quenched in water with a hiss of steam, cooled, and set aside. Peter can make perhaps 6 shoes in an hour when he's working steadily, but horseshoes are only part of Peter's work. He also repairs weapons and armor, makes tools for other craftsmen, forges hinges and locks and keys, creates all the iron hardware that the castle requires. When a plough breaks, Peter fixes it. When a knife needs sharpening, Peter grinds it. When Lady Eleanor wants decorative ironwork for the chapel, Peter creates it, working iron into scrolls and curves that seem impossible in such a hard material. In exchange for his work, Peter receives substantial benefits. He has a cottage in the village, larger than most, with a workshop attached. He's paid a small wage in silver pennies, not much, but more than many see in a year. He eats well by peasant standards, including meat more than once a week. His status is high enough that other villagers treat him with respect. His opinion is sought on various matters. When his daughter Emma wanted to marry outside the manor, the lady herself spoke with her rather than simply denying permission. Peter is not free. He's still technically a serf, bound to the manor. But his practical freedom is much greater than Robin's. His skill gives him leverage. The Lord needs him more than he needs the Lord. If Peter were truly mistreated, he could potentially run away to a town and find work as a blacksmith there. The law says serfs can't do this, but the law is often more flexible in practice than in theory. A skilled craftsman has options. Today is bittersweet for Peter, because this morning the lady gave permission for Emma to marry. Peter is happy for his daughter. The carpenter seems like a good man, and Emma clearly loves him. But Emma is Peter's youngest, his only daughter after 3 sons. When she leaves, the cottage will feel empty. Peter's wife died 2 years ago of a fever that came on suddenly and killed her within 3 days. Since then, Emma has been running the household, cooking meals, maintaining the cottage, giving Peter a reason to come home each evening after the long day at the forge. Peter's sons are all grown now. The eldest is a blacksmith like himself, working at another manor 20 miles away. The middle son works the family's small plot of land, fulfilling the labor obligations Peter himself no longer has time for. The youngest is a soldier, serving in the retinue of a lord in the north. Peter is proud of all his sons, but he misses them. And now Emma will leave too. This is the way of things, Peter tells himself as he hammers iron into shape. Children grow and leave. Parents grow old. Life continues. He's fortunate, really. His children have all found positions, work, lives of their own. Many parents see their children die young. Peter's own parents lost 4 children before they were old enough to walk. That Peter's 4 surviving children have all reached adulthood and health is something to be grateful for. As the afternoon wears on, Peter finishes the horseshoes and moves on to repairing a broken door hinge from one of the Bailey buildings. This work is more delicate, requiring him to weld the broken pieces back together. He heats the metal until it's nearly molten, then hammers the pieces together, forcing them to fuse. It requires perfect timing, perfect temperature. Too cool, and the pieces won't join. Too hot, and the metal becomes weak, will break again at the first stress. Peter loves this work in a way he could never articulate. There's something deeply satisfying about taking raw iron and shaping it into something useful, something necessary. He feels connected to a tradition stretching back centuries, to all the smiths who came before him, all the way back to the legendary smith of the gods himself. Blacksmithing is mentioned in the Bible. Peter knows. He can't read, but he's heard the stories. Tubal-Cain, the first metal worker, descended from Cain himself. It's an ancient, honored craft. By evening, Peter is tired. The constant heat of the forge, even with the open walls, is exhausting in June weather. His shoulders ache from the repetitive motion of hammering. His ears ring constantly now. He barely notices it anymore, but at night when he's trying to sleep, the ringing sometimes keeps him awake. He banks his forge carefully before leaving. Fire is always a danger, and an unattended forge could burn down not just his workshop, but half the castle. Peter checks everything twice, then walks slowly across the Bailey toward his cottage in the village. As he walks, he passes people finishing their own day's work, servants carrying the last loads of the day, guards changing shift on the walls, the porter preparing to bar the gates for the night. Peter exchanges greetings with several people. Everyone knows the blacksmith. Back at his cottage, Emma has prepared supper, pottage with vegetables from their small garden, dark bread, a bit of cheese. They eat together, mostly in silence. Peter has never been talkative, and Emma seems lost in her own thoughts, probably thinking about her upcoming marriage and new life. After supper, as darkness settles over the village, Peter sits outside his cottage for a while, enjoying the slightly cooler evening air. He can hear the sounds of the village settling for the night. Conversations from neighboring cottages. A baby crying, someone singing, dogs barking. In the distance, the castle looms dark against the sky. Torches visible on the walls where guards keep their watch. Peter thinks about his life, something he rarely does. He has worked hard, provided for his family, earned respect. He has taught his skills to his son. He has created useful things that will outlast him. What more can a man do? He's not noble, will never be remembered by history, but within his small sphere, he's lived honorably. That has to be enough, because it's all that's available to someone born as he was. Eventually the night chill drives him inside. He bars the door, says a brief prayer, and climbs into his bed. A real bed, with a straw mattress and wool blankets, not a pallet on the floor. Tomorrow will bring more work, more horseshoes, more repairs, another day of heat and hammering and fatigue. But tonight, for a few hours, Peter can rest, and that too is enough. While Peter the blacksmith creates with fire and iron, Margaret the baker creates with fire and flour, though her work is no less crucial to the castle's functioning. A castle without bread is a castle that cannot feed its people, and feeding 80 to 100 people every single day requires planning, skill, and relentless work. Margaret is 50 years old, which makes her ancient by medieval standards. Most women her age are either dead or too worn out to work, but Margaret is tough, wiry, possessed of seemingly endless energy, despite the grey in her hair and the deep lines in her face. She's been the castle's head baker for nearly 20 years, ever since the previous baker died, and Margaret, then just an assistant, proved herself capable of managing the operation. The bakery is attached to the castle kitchen but separated from it because of fire danger. It's a hot, chaotic space dominated by 2 large ovens built into the stone walls. These ovens must be fired early each morning, long before dawn, so they'll be hot enough for baking by the time the dough is ready. The firing process takes skill. Too much fire and the bread will burn, too little and it won't bake through. Margaret judges the temperature by holding her hand inside the oven, counting how long she can stand it before yanking her hand back. This traditional method has cost her some feeling in her fingers over the years, but it works. Margaret employs 4 assistants, all women from the village. 2 are her own daughters, Catherine and Anne, which gives Margaret particular satisfaction. Skills that pass from mother to daughter, like skills that pass from father to son, help maintain a family's status across generations. Catherine, the elder at 15, is already nearly as skilled as Margaret herself. In a few more years, Catherine could run the bakery. This gives Margaret a rare sense of security. She's building something that will continue after she's gone. Bread making begins the night before, when Margaret and her assistants mix flour with water, salt, and sourdough starter to create dough. The starter is crucial. A portion of fermented dough kept back from each day's baking to leaven the next day's bread. This starter has been maintained for years, perhaps decades. Some say the starter used at Thornbury was brought from Normandy by the First Lord's great-grandfather. Whether that's true or legend, Margaret doesn't know, but she treats the starter with appropriate reverence. If it dies, if it becomes contaminated, the whole process would have to begin again from scratch. The mixed dough sits overnight in wooden troughs covered with cloth, slowly rising as the wild yeasts in the starter do their work. By the time Margaret rises, well before dawn, the dough has roughly doubled in size. The surface is bubbly and alive. Now comes the physical work, kneading. Each day's baking requires 40 to 50 large loaves, plus numerous smaller ones. Each loaf must be kneaded, folded, pressed, turned, folded again for several minutes to develop the proper texture. This is exhausting labor. Margaret and her assistants work in rotation, arms burning with effort, flour coating their hands, faces, clothes, hair. The rhythm is ancient and unchanging. Push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. While some of the team kneads, others tend the ovens. The fires that heated them overnight have died down now, and the hot ashes must be scraped out. The oven floor, flat stones, must be swept clean with damp brooms. The temperature must be checked and checked again. Everything depends on getting this right. Once the dough is kneaded and shaped into loaves, the baking can begin. Using long wooden paddles called peels, the women slide loaves onto the hot stone floor of the ovens. The heat is intense. Margaret's face is perpetually flushed, her dress soaked with sweat even on cool days. And today, in June, the bakery is like an oven itself. She drinks water constantly, small beer mostly, replacing what she sweats out. The bread bakes for about half an hour, filling the bakery and the surrounding bailey with its warm, yeasty aroma. There's something profoundly satisfying about this smell, Margaret thinks. It speaks of home, of sustenance, of life itself. She's known this smell every day for 30 years, first helping her own mother, then as an assistant, now as the head baker. It's as familiar as her own children's voices. But Margaret's satisfaction with her work doesn't blind her to its hardships. The heat is punishing. The work is endless. Every single day, bread must be baked. Christmas, Easter, saints' feast days, the work continues because people must eat. Margaret's hands are scarred from minor burns accumulated over decades. Her back aches from bending over the work tables. Her feet hurt from standing on stone floors all day. She's tired in a bone-deep way that sleep never quite relieves. And the responsibility weighs on her. If the bread doesn't bake properly, if it burns or comes out doughy in the middle, if there isn't enough, these failures reflect on Margaret personally. She could lose her position, which would mean losing the small wages she receives, losing the cottage the Lord provides, losing her status. At 50, with no husband to support her. He died 10 years ago in a farming accident. Margaret depends entirely on her work to survive. So she works carefully, conscientiously, with the focused attention that comes from knowing the consequences of failure. She checks every loaf, tapping the bottom to listen for the hollow sound that indicates proper baking. She counts carefully to ensure there's enough for the household plus a small surplus. She's learned to manage her supplies precisely. Too much flour used means she'll run short before the next delivery from the Lord's mills. Too little means wasted resources that will be noted by the watchful steward. By mid-morning, when the household gathers in the great hall for the day's main meal, Margaret and her team have produced all the bread needed for the day. Fresh loaves for the high table, fine white bread made from wheat flour, soft and light, the kind that nobles expect. At the lower tables, darker bread made from a mixture of wheat and rye, denser, coarser, but still nutritious and filling. For the lowest servants, bread made from barley and oats, the cheapest grains, dark and heavy but adequate. This hierarchy of bread reflects the larger social hierarchy. You are what you eat, quite literally, in medieval society. White bread for nobles, brown bread for commoners, black bread for the poor. Everyone knows their place by what appears on their trencher. After the morning's baking is done, Margaret allows herself a brief rest. She eats her own breakfast, dark bread and cheese, a luxury because the cheese is relatively fresh, and drinks small beer while sitting on a stool outside the bakery, letting the relatively cooler outdoor air wash over her heated skin. Catherine sits beside her, and for a few moments they're just a mother and daughter resting together, not a master baker training her successor. Margaret looks at Catherine and sees herself 30 years ago, young, strong, full of energy and dreams. She wonders what dreams Catherine has. Marriage, probably. Children. A life slightly better than her mother's, if God is willing. "That boy brought water again this morning," Catherine says casually. "Robin, the one who's always so quiet." Margaret smiles slightly. She's noticed Robin's attention to Catherine, the way his eyes follow her when he thinks no one's watching. Young love, or at least young attraction. It's sweet in its way, though Margaret knows how such things usually end. Robin has nothing, is nothing by the standards of their world. Catherine could do better. There are boys from established families in the village, sons of more prosperous peasants or craftsmen. If Catherine were clever about it, she might even attract a freeman, elevate her status somewhat. But Margaret doesn't say any of this. Catherine is 15, old enough to start thinking about marriage, but young enough that there's no urgency. Let the girl have her small pleasures, her moments of feeling noticed and desired. Life will bring enough disappointments soon enough, without parents adding to them prematurely. "He seems like a decent boy," Margaret says neutrally. "Works hard from what I see." Catherine says nothing more, but Margaret sees the small smile on her daughter's face. Yes, let her have that smile while she can. The rest of Margaret's day is spent in preparation for tomorrow's baking and in other kitchen duties. More dough must be mixed and left to rise overnight. The ovens must be checked and maintained. Supplies must be inventoried. How much flour remains? How much salt? Is there enough wood for the fires? The starter must be fed with fresh flour and water to keep it alive and active. Margaret also supervises the baking of other items when needed. Meat pies for special occasions, pastries sweetened with honey for the Lord's family, occasionally elaborate constructions of bread dough shaped and baked to form table decorations for feasts. This last skill is relatively new to English castles, inspired by practices seen in France and Italy, but the Lord Steward occasionally requests such displays to impress visitors. Margaret has taught herself the techniques, studying, experimenting, sometimes failing but gradually mastering the art. This skill makes her more valuable, harder to replace. By late afternoon, Margaret is exhausted. Her body aches from the morning's intense labor. But the work is done, at least for today, and tomorrow will begin the cycle again. She returns to her cottage in the village, a small but solid structure that comes with her position. Her younger daughter Anne is already there, having left the bakery earlier to begin preparing their evening meal. They eat simply. Pottage, bread, of course, a bit of bacon. After the meal, as dusk settles, Margaret sits by her small hearth, spinning wool by the fading light. This spinning is not required labor, but something she does for her own benefit, to create thread that can be woven into cloth for clothing. The rhythmic motion is soothing after the day's intensity. She thinks about her life, about the strange paths it has taken. Born to a simple peasant family, she might have expected to spend her life in the fields, bearing children, growing old and worn out by 30. Instead, she learned a valuable trade, developed a skill that gave her security. She's raised 2 daughters successfully to young adulthood. No small feat when so many children die young. She has a position, respect, relative security. It's not an easy life. But whose life is easy? The nobles have their own burdens, their own constraints. The knights risk death in battle. Even the Lord himself must worry about politics, about keeping the king's favor, about managing complex estates. Everyone has their struggles. Margaret's struggles just happen to involve flour and ovens and aching hands. As darkness falls completely, Margaret says her prayers, rote words learned in childhood, asking God's protection for herself and her daughters, thanking him for the day's bread, requesting mercy for her sins. Then she climbs into bed. Another day complete, another day survived. Tomorrow she'll rise before dawn again. The fires will need lighting, the dough will need kneading, the bread will need baking. This will continue day after day for as long as Margaret's body holds out. And when she can no longer work, when age or illness finally claims her, someone else will take her place. Catherine, perhaps, if she's fortunate, or someone else. The castle will need bread whether Margaret is there to make it or not. This is oddly comforting, Margaret thinks as she drifts towards sleep. Her work matters because it's necessary, because people depend on it, but it's also larger than herself. She's part of something continuous, something that was here before her and will be here after. In that continuity, there's a kind of peace. As the day wears toward evening, the castle gradually shifts its rhythms. The intense activity of morning and midday slows. People complete their tasks and begin thinking towards supper and rest. But some of the castle's most important inhabitants are only now rising to their duties. Sir Hugh, one of the knights of Thornbury's garrison, has spent much of the day training. Knights must practice constantly. Their skills, riding a war horse at full gallop, wielding sword and lance, fighting in armor, require maintenance. A knight who doesn't train regularly becomes rusty, slow, vulnerable. Hugh is 28 years old, which makes him relatively young for a knight but not untried. He fought in France 2 years ago during one of the endless conflicts between English and French nobles over territorial disputes. He saw combat, killed men, was wounded himself by an arrow that left a scar across his ribs. These experiences mark him as a real warrior, not just someone who plays at war. But most of Hugh's time isn't spent fighting. He serves in the Lord's household, providing military presence and authority. When Geoffrey is away, Hugh is the ranking military officer at Thornbury, responsible for the castle's defence and for maintaining order. This is not a demanding job in peaceful times, but it's a responsible one. Hugh is not noble in the same way that Lady Eleanor is noble. He doesn't own significant land, doesn't command vassals of his own. He's what's called a household knight, a professional warrior who serves a greater lord in exchange for wages, food, and accommodations. His status is respectable, but it's earned through service rather than inherited through birth. Hugh's day began with mass, then breakfast in the great hall, then training. He spent the morning in the practice yard working with younger men-at-arms, teaching them proper sword technique, drilling them in formations, correcting their mistakes. The work is physically demanding. Even practice fighting in armor is exhausting. But Hugh takes pride in it. Good training can mean the difference between life and death in actual combat. After the midday meal, Hugh conducted an inspection of the castle's defences. This is a regular duty. He walks the walls, checking that guards are alert, that weapons are maintained, that the battlements are in good repair. He inspects the gatehouse, ensures the portcullis operates smoothly, checks that supplies of arrows and crossbow bolts are adequate. Most of this is routine. Nothing is likely to attack Thornbury in the current political climate. But vigilance is necessary. Complacency kills. Now, as evening approaches, Hugh attends to administrative work. Like all knights, he can read and write, at least in French and Latin, if not in English. This literacy makes him useful for tasks beyond fighting. He's currently updating the castle's watch rosters, ensuring that guards are assigned fairly, that no one pulls too many night shifts in a row. Hugh has his own chamber in one of the towers, a small room but private with a real door he can close. This privacy is a luxury that marks his status. The room is simply furnished. A bed, a chest for his belongings, a stand for his armor, a small table. But it's his space, his alone. His armor hangs on the stand, chainmail that he maintains carefully, oiling it regularly to prevent rust. Each link of the mail was forged individually, riveted together into a flexible protective garment. The whole thing weighs about 30 pounds. Hugh is so accustomed to its weight that he barely notices it when fighting. His sword hangs on the wall, always within reach. This sword is Hugh's most valuable possession. It was made by a master swordsmith in London, cost more than a year's wages, and is perfectly balanced for Hugh's height and reach. He's named it Anguish, because that's what he gives to his enemies. This naming of swords is an old custom, one that makes the weapon feel less like a tool and more like a companion. As he works on the rosters, Hugh thinks about his future. He's unmarried, which is common for household knights. Marriage requires resources to support a family, and Hugh's wages, while adequate, aren't generous. He could potentially marry a merchant's daughter if he could find one whose father was willing to accept a landless knight as a son-in-law. Or he might marry a widow who brought some property to the marriage. These are the realistic options for someone in his position. But Hugh isn't sure he wants marriage. His life now is straightforward, dedicated to martial craft and service. A wife would complicate things, Add obligations and emotional entanglements, and what kind of life could he offer a wife? He's gone for months at a time when the Lord needs him. He risks death every time he enters combat. Better, perhaps, to remain as he is, a professional warrior, married to his sword and his service. This doesn't mean Hugh is without human connections. He has a woman in the village, a widow named Mary, who welcomes him to her bed occasionally when mutual desire and opportunity coincide. This relationship is understood by both parties to be temporary and without future. Mary knows Hugh won't marry her. Hugh knows Mary might marry someone else if a better opportunity appears. Neither expects more than the simple human comfort they give each other. As darkness falls, Hugh completes his administrative work and prepares for the evening meal. He dons a fresh surcoat over his mail. He wears armor essentially all day, a habit formed in wartime that he's never quite broken. The surcoat bears the Thornbury arms, marking Hugh as part of the Lord's household. He straps on his sword. A knight is never unarmed, even in his own castle. Supper in the great hall is a more elaborate affair than the morning meal. The household gathers again, but now the atmosphere is more relaxed. The day's work is largely done. People can afford to linger over their food, to talk and laugh. Musicians sometimes play. Tonight, a traveling minstrel has arrived seeking hospitality, and he'll perform in exchange for his meal and a place to sleep. Hugh sits at one of the lower tables, not quite high enough in status to join the Lord's family, but well above the common servants. He eats well: meat, good bread, vegetables cooked with herbs, ale to wash it down. The food is simple by noble standards, but generous by any other measure. Hugh has known hunger in his life, campaigning in France where supplies were scarce. He doesn't take full plates for granted. The minstrel plays and sings, songs in French about love and war, the usual subjects. Hugh half listens while eating, his mind partly occupied with reviewing the day and planning tomorrow. There's an edge to his awareness even here, in the relative safety of the hall. A warrior's habit of noting exits, potential weapons, who around him might be a threat. It's exhausting in a way to never fully relax, but it's kept him alive this long. After supper, Hugh makes a final tour of the walls. The night watch has taken their positions. Guards stand at intervals along the battlements, wrapped in cloaks against the cooling night air. They greet Hugh respectfully as he passes, and he responds in kind. These men are under his command, but Hugh knows that good commanders earn respect rather than simply demanding it. From the walls, the view is extensive. The village below shows scattered points of firelight from cottage windows. Beyond, the fields are dark, invisible except where moonlight catches them. The surrounding forest is a black mass on the horizon. It's peaceful, this view. Hugh finds it calming after the busy chaos of the day. But even in this peace, Hugh's mind turns to war. It always does. He thinks about how an enemy might approach, through the forest for concealment, probably, emerging suddenly at dawn. How would he deploy defenders? Where are the weak points in the walls? How long could they hold out if besieged? These thoughts are both professional and compulsive. Hugh can't stop thinking like a warrior even when there's no immediate threat. perhaps he never will. Eventually, Hugh returns to his chamber. He removes his sword and mail, a process that takes several minutes. The mail must be hung properly to maintain its shape. His gambeson, the padded garment worn under the mail, is soaked with sweat despite the cool evening. He'll need to air it out tomorrow. He says brief prayers before sleep, asking God's protection and the strength to fulfill his duties. Then he lies down on his bed, a real frame with ropes supporting a straw mattress. Luxury compared to what most people sleep on. Despite his fatigue, sleep doesn't come immediately. His mind remains active, reviewing the day, planning tomorrow, worrying about things he can't control. This is Hugh's life. Service, training, vigilance, responsibility. He's good at it, perhaps even content with it, though he rarely thinks about happiness or contentment. Those are not concepts that occupy much space in a warrior's mind. He thinks instead about duty, honor, capability, the values that define knighthood. Tomorrow he'll rise and do it all again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until his lord needs him elsewhere, or until the enemy comes, or until age or injury makes him useless. A knight's life is simple in its way. Serve, fight, endure. Hugh asks for nothing more and expects nothing less. As night settles fully over Thornbury Castle, as most of its inhabitants seek their beds and sleep, one group of people remains wakeful and vigilant. The night watch guards the castle through the dark hours, protecting against threats both real and imagined. Geoffrey, not to be confused with the Lord, is a sergeant of the guard, a common soldier who's earned authority through experience and competence. He's 45 years old, grey-haired, scarred from minor battles and major training accidents. He's served at Thornbury for 20 years, ever since he was a young man seeking employment after his father's death left him landless. Geoffrey the sergeant oversees the night watch, ensuring that guards remain alert, that the patrols follow their routes, that nothing is missed. It's tedious work, if truth be told. Thornbury hasn't faced a real threat in Geoffrey's entire time here. The guards are more likely to deal with a drunk trying to climb the walls to see his sweetheart than an actual enemy attack. But vigilance must be maintained. Complacency is dangerous. Tonight is quiet, which is both good and unsettling. Good because nothing needs attention. Unsettling because the silence presses down, making small sounds seem ominous. The wind sighs around the towers. Somewhere an owl calls. A dog barks in the village, then falls silent. Geoffrey walks the walls slowly, checking on each guard. Most are awake and alert, or at least manage to look alert when they hear his footsteps approaching. A few he finds dozing, not deeply asleep, but that twilight state where wakefulness blurs into rest. He rouses these men with a sharp word but no real punishment. Night watch is exhausting. The body wants to sleep. Staying awake requires constant effort. "See anything?" Geoffrey asks Thomas, one of the younger guards. "Nothing, Sergeant. All quiet." "Keep it that way. Watch the tree line especially. That's where trouble comes from, if it's coming." Thomas nods, trying to look competent and alert. Geoffrey moves on. Thomas is a good lad, but inexperienced. He's never seen real combat, never faced a real threat. For him, this is just a job, somewhat boring. Geoffrey remembers feeling the same way at Thomas's age. Then he'd fought in a minor border skirmish, seen men killed, nearly died himself. After that, guard duty never felt boring again. The night deepens. The moon rises higher, providing enough light to see by. Geoffrey continues his rounds, a routine so familiar that his feet could walk it blind. This battlement, around this tower, down these stairs, across the bailey, up to the gatehouse. Check the portcullis mechanism. Check that the gates are properly barred. Back along the opposite wall. Round and round through the night, a circuit measured in footsteps and heartbeats. Sometimes Geoffrey's mind wanders during these rounds. He thinks about his life, about the choices that brought him here, about what else he might have done. He could have stayed in his village and become a peasant farmer, working land rather than standing watch. He probably would have died younger. Farming is hard work that breaks bodies, but maybe he'd have been happier. Maybe he'd have had a family, children, a sense of rootedness that guards never achieve. But Geoffrey has never married, never had children. His life has been the castle, the guard, the walls. 20 years of the same walls, the same towers, the same views. He knows every stone, every crack, every loose piece of mortar. This intimate knowledge sometimes feels like imprisonment. He can never escape these walls even when he leaves them. But it also feels like belonging. This is his place. He's earned it through decades of service. Around midnight, Geoffrey allows himself a brief rest. He sits on a stone bench in the gatehouse, where the guards have a small brazier burning for warmth. The night has turned cold, as June nights sometimes do in England. Geoffrey wraps his cloak tighter and accepts a cup of ale from one of the guards. They sit in companionable silence for a while, these men who share the strange hours of the night watch. Quiet tonight, one of the guards observes. Aye, Geoffrey agrees. Pray it stays that way. They've shared this exchange, or variations of it, hundreds of times. It's ritual, comforting in its familiarity. After his rest, Geoffrey resumes his rounds. The castle sleeps around him. In the keep, Lady Eleanor is asleep in her chamber. In the hall, servants sleep on pallets. In the village, everyone sleeps except perhaps a mother with a crying infant, or someone kept awake by worry or pain. The whole world seems asleep except for Geoffrey and his guards, holding their vigil, keeping watch while others rest. This is the bargain, Geoffrey thinks. Some people work the day, some work the night. Together, they keep the castle functioning, keep everyone safe, maintain the order that allows civilization to exist. It's not glorious work. No one writes songs about guards standing on walls through quiet nights. But it's necessary. Without people like Geoffrey, without the night watch, chaos would come. Dawn is still hours away when Geoffrey completes another circuit of the walls. He's tired now, bone-deep tired. His legs ache, his back hurts. He's not young anymore, and these long night watches are getting harder. But he'll do his duty. He always has. He doesn't know how to do otherwise. The stars wheel slowly overhead. The moon begins its descent. The castle remains peaceful, wrapped in the deep darkness of the middle hours of night. And Geoffrey walks on, watching, waiting, protecting, always protecting. This is his life's work, unglamorous but essential. And when his watch ends at dawn, when the day guards take over, Geoffrey will finally seek his bed and the few hours of sleep before the cycle begins again. The castle exists within a larger world, connected to it through bonds of economy, politics, and necessity. The village of Thornbury, clustered near the castle walls, forms the most immediate of these connections. The castle depends on the village for labor and food. The village depends on the castle for protection and justice. Neither can exist without the other. John the Reeve is the village's most important man below the Lord. He's elected by the villagers themselves, but must be confirmed by the Lord. His job is to manage the agricultural work, oversee the peasants' labor obligations, mediate minor disputes, and serve as the link between the village and the castle administration. It's a position that requires political skill, agricultural knowledge, and the trust of both the villagers and the Lord's steward. John is perhaps 50 years old. He's lost track of his exact age, which is typical for peasants. He's prosperous by village standards, holding more land than most, with several adult sons to help work it. This prosperity is both the result of his position as Reeve and the reason he was chosen for it. The Reeve must have time to manage village affairs, which means he needs family labor to work his own fields. John's day begins before dawn, like everyone's in the village. He and his wife Margaret, not to be confused with the baker, wake in their cottage. It's a substantial building by village standards, 2 rooms instead of 1, a separate area for their few animals, a loft where children sleep. The walls are wattle and daub, woven sticks plastered with a mixture of mud and dung, then whitewashed. The roof is thatch. The floor is packed earth. There are no windows, only a hole in the roof to let smoke out, so the interior is dark and smoky, even during the day. Margaret, John's wife Margaret, revives the fire, coaxing embers back to life, feeding them kindling and then larger pieces of wood. She hangs a pot over the fire to heat water for pottage. This is breakfast, as it is most mornings, leftover pottage from yesterday reheated, dark bread, perhaps an onion. The children, 3 still at home, 2 boys and a girl, stumble down from the loft, still half asleep. John breaks his fast quickly. There's much to do today. It's mid-June and the first hay harvest is beginning. The hay must be cut, dried and stored before the weather turns. This work requires organizing the entire village. Everyone capable of labor must help. After breakfast, John walks through the village, checking that people are preparing for the day's work. He stops at various cottages, calling out greetings, asking about health, giving instructions. Everyone knows the routine. The hay cutting has been done this way for generations, but John's role is to coordinate to ensure that all the fields are covered, that no one shirks their duties. The village consists of perhaps 20 cottages, housing 100 people or so. Most are serfs, like Robin's family, bound to the lord's manor. A few are free men who rent land rather than owing labor service. The distinction is significant legally, but sometimes less so in practice. Everyone here works the land. Everyone here struggles to produce enough to survive and pay what's owed to the lord. John walks to the open fields that surround the village. These fields operate on the three-field system that's common throughout England. One field is planted with winter wheat, sown last autumn and now ripening toward harvest. Another field is planted with spring crops, barley, oats, peas. The third field lies fallow, resting to restore its fertility. Next year, the fields will rotate. It's an efficient system, developed over centuries, that allows the land to remain productive without exhausting itself. But these fields belong to the Lord, not the peasants who work them. This is the Lord's domain, his own land, worked by his serfs as part of their labor obligations. Each serf owes several days of work per week on the domain, plus extra work during critical times like planting and harvest. In exchange, they're allowed to work small plots of their own, strips scattered throughout the fields, where they grow food for themselves and their families. The hay meadow where today's work will happen lies along a stream, natural water providing the moisture that makes grass grow thick and lush. This hay will feed the Lord's horses and cattle through winter. Without it, the animals would starve. So the hay harvest is crucial, and everyone must help. John organizes the workers into groups. The men with scythes, long-handled blades designed for cutting grass, form the first line. They move through the meadow in a row, swinging their scythes in steady rhythm, cutting the grass close to the ground. Behind them come women and older children with rakes, spreading the cut grass to dry in the sun. Later, when the grass has dried to hay, it will be gathered into haystacks to be carted away and stored. This work requires coordination. The scythes must swing in rhythm to avoid accidents. A scythe blade is sharp enough to cut through flesh as easily as grass. The women must spread the grass quickly so the next row of men can move forward. Everyone must work steadily, hour after hour, because the hay won't wait. If rain comes before the grass is dry, it will rot. If the work takes too long, the grass will seed and become less nutritious. John moves among the workers, encouraging, correcting, sometimes helping directly. At his age, he can't swing a scythe for hours as younger men do. His back protests after just a short time. But he can rake, can help load hay onto carts, can do the 100 small tasks that keep the work moving forward. The sun climbs higher, the day grows hot. The workers sweat heavily, their simple clothing soaked. They stop periodically to drink from jugs of small beer. the weak ale that everyone drinks because water often isn't safe. The ale provides some calories and refreshment without making workers drunk. At midday, Margaret arrives with food. She's organized the village women to prepare a communal meal: bread, cheese, onions, and yesterday's pottage. The workers gather in the shade of trees bordering the meadow, eating quickly, talking little. They're too tired for much conversation. After half an hour, John calls them back to work. There are still many hours before dark, still much hay to cut. John watches his people work and feels the weight of responsibility. He must keep them moving, keep productivity high, because the Lord's steward will check on the work and expect good results. But he also wants to protect his neighbors from being driven too hard. It's a delicate balance. Push too hard and people become resentful. Push too little and the steward reports to the lady that John isn't managing properly. This political navigation is the core of John's role as reeve. He must serve two masters: the Lord who commands from the castle and the villagers who elected him to speak for them. Sometimes these interests align, sometimes they conflict. John does his best to find middle ground, to keep both sides satisfied, or at least not too dissatisfied. In the afternoon, a dispute arises. Two men, both wielding scythes, nearly come to blows over a perceived slight. John rushes to intervene, physically stepping between them. "Enough! Save your strength for the work." The men glare at each other, but back down. John's authority is sufficient to prevent escalation, at least for now. But he'll need to address this properly later, perhaps bring it to the manorial court, if it's serious enough. The afternoon wears on. The work continues, monotonous and exhausting. Cut, rake, spread. Cut, rake, spread. The rhythm of agricultural labor, unchanged for centuries, will be unchanged for centuries more. John's grandfather did this work. John's sons do this work. John's grandsons will do this work. This is simply life for people like them. As the sun drops toward the horizon, John finally calls a halt. The workers trudge back toward the village, carrying their tools, their bodies aching, their hands blistered. They've cut perhaps half the meadow today. Tomorrow, they'll return and cut more. The day after, more still. Within a week, the entire first cutting will be done, the hay dried and stored, this crucial task complete. John walks back to his cottage slowly, his own body protesting every step. He's not as young as he once was, and this work reminds him of that fact. At home, Margaret has prepared supper, more pottage, dark bread, a bit of bacon. They eat with their children, speaking little. Everyone is too tired for conversation. After supper, as darkness settles, John steps outside for a moment. The village is quiet now, everyone exhausted from the day's labor. Smoke rises from cottage roofs. A dog barks somewhere. The castle looms dark against the sky, torches visible on its walls where guards keep watch. John thinks about the invisible bonds connecting village and castle, peasant and lord. The hay he supervised cutting today will feed the lord's horses. Those horses carry knights who fight to protect this land. Those knights serve a lord who dispenses justice and provides order. The system works after a fashion because each part depends on the others. But John also thinks about the unfairness of it. He and his people do the work, the back-breaking labor that produces everything of value, yet they receive the smallest share. The Lord, who never soils his hands, who has never swung a scythe or bent his back in the fields, receives most of the benefit. This seems unjust, and yet, what can be done? This is the world as God made it. To question it is to question God's wisdom. John pushes these thoughts away. They lead nowhere and accomplish nothing. He returns inside, says his brief prayers, and lies down to sleep. Tomorrow will bring more work, more responsibility, more navigation of the complex relationships between castle and village, lord and peasant. But tonight, for a few hours, John can rest. And rest, when it finally comes after such a day, is its own kind of blessing. As the night deepens and the castle's inhabitants sleep or keep their watch, the rhythms of medieval life continue their eternal cycle. The castle is both a world unto itself and a piece of a larger world, connected to the village, to the manor, to the kingdom, to Christendom itself through invisible threads of obligation, economy, politics, and faith. In her chamber, Lady Eleanor sleeps fitfully, her dreams troubled by the endless responsibilities that wait for morning. Beside her, though not with her propriety forbids, Agnes the maid sleeps on a pallet on the floor, ready to serve if called. In the children's chambers, Matilda, Joan, and young Thomas sleep the deep sleep of youth, untroubled by adult concerns. In the great hall, servants lie on pallets scattered across the floor, the dying embers of the hearth providing minimal warmth. They sleep close together for additional heat, for comfort, for simple human connection. Their sleep is deep because their labor is hard. They'll wake when the bell rings for dawn prayers, ready or not, and begin another day of service. In the tower chambers, knights and senior servants enjoy the luxury of doors that close, of private spaces. Sir Hugh sleeps with his sword within arm's reach, a warrior's habit never broken. William the Steward sleeps with account books and wax tablets visible on his small desk, work never quite complete. Father Benedict sleeps in his small cell near the chapel, his dreams perhaps more pious than most, his mind even in sleep turning toward God. In the stables above where Robin sleeps, horses shift and snort in their stalls below. The sound is oddly comforting to Robin. He's slept above these horses for years now, and their presence is familiar. He dreams, perhaps, of Catherine's smile, of a future he can't quite imagine but desperately wants. In the village, John the Reeve sleeps in his cottage, his body recovering from the day's labor, his mind at rest for once from the endless balancing act his position requires. Margaret, his wife, sleeps beside him, her own body equally exhausted from a day of work that never quite ends for peasant women. Peter the blacksmith sleeps in his cottage, his daughter Emma beside him, though soon she'll leave for her new life. The smith's sleep is deep, but his dreams are troubled by approaching loneliness. Margaret the baker sleeps in her own cottage nearby, Catherine and Anne in the loft above. The baker dreams of bread. She always does. The yeasty smell follows her even into sleep. On the castle walls, Geoffrey the sergeant completes another circuit, his legs heavy, his eyes gritty with exhaustion. But he'll stay alert, stay watchful, because this is his duty, and he's never failed it. The guards under his command doze or daydream or stare into the darkness, each man dealing with the tedium of the watch in his own way. This is Thornbury Castle on a June night in 1250. These are its people, from the highest to the lowest, from the most powerful to the most powerless. Each person locked into their station by birth and custom, yet each person fully human with hopes and fears, joys and sorrows, dreams and disappointments. The system that organizes their lives seems natural to them, divinely ordained, the only way the world could possibly work. They cannot imagine democracy or equality or social mobility in any meaningful sense. These concepts don't exist yet in the medieval European mind. Instead, they understand the world as a great chain of being, each person a link, each person necessary, all connected in a hierarchy that extends from the lowest peasant through kings and emperors up to angels and finally to God himself. This worldview provides comfort and structure. Everyone knows their place, knows their duties, knows what's expected. But it also creates crushing constraints. You are born to a station and will almost certainly die in that station. Your children will inherit your position. Your grandchildren will inherit it in turn. Change is slow, rare, and often unwelcome. Yet within these constraints, people live fully human lives. Eleanor exercises power and carries responsibility. Hugh serves with honor and skill. Margaret creates sustenance with her hands. Peter shapes metal and provides for his family. John balances competing demands with political skill. Robin dreams of a better future even as he carries endless buckets of water. These are not simple people living simple lives, despite what later centuries might assume. Medieval life is complex, nuanced, filled with politics and economics, relationships and tensions, cooperation and conflict. The castle is not just a building, but a living community, an ecosystem of human relationships and interactions. And this community exists within larger contexts. The castle is part of a manor, which is part of a barony, which is part of a kingdom, which is part of Christendom. Eleanor must consider not just Thornbury, but her family's relationship with other noble families. Geoffrey the Lord must consider not just his own lands, but his obligations to the king. John the Reeve must consider not just his own village, but its relationship with neighboring villages and manors. These connections stretch across England, across Europe, connecting this small stone fortress in the west of England to the papal court in Rome, to the royal court in Westminster, to markets in London and Paris and beyond. The castle is both isolated, a self-contained world behind thick walls, and deeply connected to networks of trade, politics, religion, and culture that span the known world. As dawn approaches, as the night watch nears its end, as the sleeping castle begins to stir once more toward waking, we can step back and see this community in its fuller context. Thornbury Castle in 1250 is unremarkable by the standards of its time. It's neither particularly large nor particularly wealthy. Its lord is a minor baron, not a great magnate. Its people are ordinary. No heroes, no saints, just people trying to live their lives within the constraints available to them. But in that ordinariness lies something profound. This is how most people lived in medieval Europe. Not in the great events recorded by chroniclers, not in the wars and councils and coronations, but in the daily routine of castle life. Getting up, working, eating, sleeping, fulfilling obligations, managing relationships, hoping for small improvements, enduring inevitable hardships. The sun will rise soon, as it does every morning, indifferent to human concerns. The bell will ring for lords, calling the faithful to prayer. Eleanor will wake and begin another day of administration and decision-making. Robin will hoist another bucket, take another step, live another day in service. Peter will heat his forge and shape metal. Margaret will knead dough and bake bread. Hugh will train and inspect and remain vigilant. John will organize labor and mediate disputes. Geoffrey will finally seek his bed after a long night of watching. The cycle continues day after day, year after year, generation after generation. The people change. Eleanor will eventually die. Robin will grow old. New babies will be born to take their place in the hierarchy, but the system continues. The castle stands. The walls endure. The cycle repeats. This is life in a medieval castle, from lord to serf. Not the sanitized version of fairy tales or the simplified version of children's books, but the real, complex, difficult, occasionally beautiful reality of medieval existence. A world of rigid hierarchy, but also of community. A world of hard labor, but also of skilled craftsmanship. A world of constraint, but also of human connection. A world that seems utterly foreign to our modern experience, yet a world populated by people who, underneath the alien customs and beliefs, were fundamentally like us, trying to survive, to find meaning, to leave something behind. The eastern sky brightens. Another dawn has come to Thornbury Castle, and with it comes the promise and burden of another day in the year 1250, when the world was young and old at once, when castles stood strong against chaos, when hierarchy seemed natural and God seemed near. The story of one day in one castle in 1 year, but also the story of countless days, countless castles, countless years. The story of how people lived when the world was very different, yet how they lived with hopes and fears and dreams not so different from our own. Let us leave them to their morning, to their new day full of familiar tasks and ancient rhythms. Let us remember that we stand on foundations they built, that our world grew from their world, that we are not separate from them, but connected by the long thread of human history. The sun rises, the castle wakes, life continues as it has as it always will, until the last stone falls and the last memory fades. And even then, perhaps, something of their lives will remain in the stones they placed, the fields they ploughed, the words they spoke, the bread they baked, the children they raised, the communities they built and maintained. Not immortality, perhaps, but something. A presence in the world that mattered, that had meaning, that was real. This was Thornbury Castle. These were its people. This was their life. And for one day in June, in the year 1250, we walked beside them through their world. Sleep well, traveller, with images of stone and smoke, duty and dignity, hierarchy and humanity. The castle stands through the centuries, a monument to a world that was. But in your dreams tonight, perhaps you'll walk its walls once more. Smell the bread baking, hear the blacksmith's hammer, see the sun rise over those ancient stones. And in the morning, when you wake to your own world, you'll carry something of their world with you. A deeper understanding of how people lived, how communities functioned, how humanity has always struggled and endured and hoped, no matter the age, no matter the circumstances. Good night from the walls of Thornbury, from the year 1250, from a world both distant and near. May your dreams be peaceful, your rest deep, and your awakening gentle.